The wind rolled gently across the plains like a slow heartbeat, brushing the tall grass into waves of pale gold beneath the lowering sun. And Caleb McCoy, a quiet cowboy of modest fame and far greater solitude, guided his horse along the path toward his ranch, dust etched across his hat brim, and the memory of a long day settling into his bones, when he saw her a lone figure at the edge of the creek that cut through his land like a silver vein, crouched beside the water, wrapped in a faded blanket and trembling, like someone who had gone too many nights without the comfort of safety or warmth. She looked up when she heard the hoofbeats, her eyes black as polished obsidian and wider than fear, and he pulled the reins gently, unsure if she was a ghost of the setting sun or something more real than anything he'd seen in months. Then she stood, lifting her chin in fragile defiance, and said in a voice that cracked like drifting sand, "Please don't send me away. I can help, I can stay. I'll give you more than any white woman ever could." The words rushed out before she inhaled, as if every syllable was a plea she had carried for miles, and Caleb blinked, taken aback by the desperation stitched between the syllables, the way she braced herself for rejection, ready to be hunted again by whatever demons had chased her across the plains. He swung down from his horse, boots sinking slightly into the moist dirt beside the water, and for a moment he simply watched her, observed the scar that trailed across her upper arm like the memory of a blade, the raw skin at her wrists where bindings may have rubbed, the tangled hair that might have once been braided with ribbons or beads, before cruelty tore her life apart. And though Caleb was no saint, he was no monster either. His father had taught him to honor kindness where he could, to treat the land gently and people more gently still. So he shrugged one shoulder and offered her the simplest mercy he knew. "You're on my land, but I'm not gonna hurt you. You hungry?" And her knees weakened at the sound of his patience, as if she had been braced for a blow, not a question. Tears shimmered but did not fall, and she nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around her shivering body, whispering, "I haven't eaten since 2 sunsets ago. They chased me, west, then east. I don't even know anymore." And the tremor in her voice reminded Caleb of a wounded colt he once nursed back to health after a stampede. So without thinking, he extended a hand, roughened with rope calluses and sun-worn skin, and said, "Come on then," to which she hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because she had long forgotten how to accept kindness without fearing its cost. Eventually she reached for him, their palms touching, a fleeting contact electric with uncertainty and fragile hope. Then he helped her mount his horse, settling her carefully before swinging up behind her, keeping his distance as best he could so she didn't feel trapped. The ranch lay a half-mile away, tucked against rolling hills, the sky above painted in long ribbons of indigo and russet. And as they rode, she spoke softly in broken pieces, telling him her name was Tala, which meant Volf in her mother's language, though she confessed she no longer felt like anyone's Volf, only prey. And Caleb listened, each word stitching itself into his mind like the pattern of stars he memorized on sleepless nights. She spoke of traders who promised safety and then sold her, of the town that blurred past in terror, of men who thought her body was worth more than her life. And when they reached the ranch gate, Caleb felt a protective warmth in his chest, something he had not felt since his own mother died and left him a half-wild boy clinging to his father's shadow. Now he swung down, lifted her carefully again despite her insistence she could walk, and guided her toward the house. Nothing grand, just timber, worn edges, and a porch that sang like old bones in the wind. Inside, the scent of wood smoke and leather soothed her immediately, a warmth she pressed her palms toward as if it were the sun itself. Caleb fetched a tin of beans, some bread, a jar of peach preserves he'd traded for last spring, and before she could speak, he said plainly, "Eat," and she did, trembling hands scooping small bites at first until hunger took over, her eyes closing with every swallow, gratitude unspoken but pulsing through every gesture. When she finished, she sat back, hands resting in her lap, and she whispered again what she'd said earlier, though softer now, "Let me stay. I don't want to run anymore. I'll fight for you. I'll work. I'll give you more than any white woman ever could." But Caleb exhaled sharply, not with anger but aching disbelief at the wounds buried under her words, and replied, "You don't owe me anything. Not your body, not your loyalty, not your future. If you stay, it's because you wanted to breathe here, not because you think you have to buy your place." And she looked at him as though he were a man out of legend, because she had known men who took and took until there was nothing left, not one who refused the leverage she thought she had to offer. He poured water in a basin and gestured, "Wash if you want. The bed's in the corner. I'll sleep outside with the horses tonight." And she shook her head, whispering, "No, I can take the barn." But he only smiled sadly. "You've slept with fear for too long. You get the room tonight," and walked out before she could argue, leaving her staring at the quilt that covered the small bed like an impossible dream. Outside, he leaned against the porch rail, staring at the moon rising like a silver lantern above the plains, and he wondered who she truly was when fear wasn't devouring her, wondered if her voice carried songs by firelight, if her eyes once sparked like lightning during tribal dances, wondered if she had someone praying for her somewhere in the long miles she'd crossed, and though his heart had long ago locked itself away from the world, something in her need tore a seam he hadn't known could still open. Inside, Tala wiped her face, washed away dirt from her arms, and stared at her reflection in the basin's shallow water, seeing not the captive, not the hunted runaway, but the girl her mother raised proud, patient, capable of fire and tenderness alike. And she lay on the bed, not to surrender, but to breathe, a sensation so foreign she touched her chest to be sure it was real. Midnight spilled across the ranch, and sleep began its slow climb into her eyelids. Only then did memories slip free, a childhood of braiding horsehair, of running along canyon ridges, of laughter before the world became teeth and iron. She didn't know if she belonged here, but she did know the cowboy's presence steadied something inside her. And when dawn came, she rose early, stepped barefoot into the yard, found him tending the cattle, and approached quietly, offering to help. And he motioned her toward the chicken coop, half expecting her to struggle, but she moved with practiced hands, gathering eggs without startling the hens, humming a low tune that sounded like a prayer carried on wind. And for the first time in months, Caleb smiled, not forced, not tired, but real, like the sun breaking free of storm clouds. And as the day stretched, she worked beside him, neither of them speaking much, yet every glance between them threaded another link in the quiet bond forming beneath the surface, the fear in her eyes slowly draining, replaced with strength that glimmered like dawn on creek water. And that evening, as the fire snapped in the hearth and coyotes called in the distance, she finally asked the question she had feared all day, "Will you send me away tomorrow?" And Caleb shook his head, voice low and steady, "Not tomorrow. Not unless you want to go." And she stepped closer, resting a tentative hand on his forearm, not begging this time, but simply acknowledging the truth rising between them, the fragile beginning of trust. And he let her hand stay there, didn't flinch, didn't pull away. And the room grew quiet as the stars pressed against the windows, the world outside still wild and cruel. But inside the walls of his ranch, two hearts began to rediscover something ancient and gentle. Not lust born of desperation, not bargains forged in fear, but the slow, awkward possibility of love, of healing, of building a life where she didn't have to trade her worth to survive, where he didn't have to shoulder loneliness like a brand. And as she leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his body, she whispered without trembling this time, "I don't want to be a ghost anymore." And Caleb, eyes half closed, replied, "You're not a ghost. You're Tala, and you're safe here." And though neither of them knew what the next sunrise would bring, the promise of hope hung between them like a lantern in the dark, bright enough to guide them forward, fragile enough to cherish every moment it stayed lit. And as sleep finally lured her toward rest, she drifted into dreams of home, not the one she lost, but the one she might build, piece by piece, beside the cowboy who chose compassion over conquest.